Good evening. Welcome to the philosophy panel discussion for All Things Have Standing. Throughout the philosophy program, we've explored the idea that all things have ethical standing through the lens of three Western European philosophers, Martin Heidegger, Emmanuel Levinas, and Sylvia Benso. Today, we have a fantastic group of panelists to examine the idea that all things have ethical standing from other religious, cultural, and intellectual traditions. Dr. Ephraim Isaac, Dr. Emalani Case, and Dr. Jue Shi. Dr. Emalani Case, would you like to begin?
Ke aloha nui a kākou o wau Emalani Case no Hawaii mai au. Aloha, my name is Emalani Case. I am Kanaka Maoli. I'm Native Hawaiian. I have a PhD in Pacific Studies. Hawaii, though colonially associated with the United States, is part of the Pacific. And so much of my work as a teacher, as a writer, as a blogger, as an activist, has been to explore relationships between Hawaii and the rest of the Pacific.
Dr. Shi.
Auspicious greetings. It is customary here in Australia to begin any meeting with an acknowledgement of country. And so I'd like to do the same. I'd like to acknowledge the Wodi Wodi people of the Darawal Nation as the traditional custodians of the land I walk, study, and reside on. I pay my respects to the elders past and present and extend those respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders peoples of today. And I am Jue Wei. I am part of the Nantian Institute of Higher Education here in Wollongong, Australia. We are very honored by the generosity, care, and knowledge of the Indigenous peoples who have taken care of the land. And I consider myself a student of Buddhism. I'm very honored to be able to learn a lot from my peers here who are teaching. I, in particular, specialize in applied Buddhist studies and humanistic Buddhism, a form of Buddhism that my teacher, Venerable Master Xing Yun, promotes around the world. And today I hope for an opportunity to listen to the wisdom of my peers here on the panel and to learn from them. So thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Isaac.
Good evening. My name is Ephraim Isaac. I am born in a country called Ethiopia. My father was born in Yemen. My children are born in America. So I'm born on this planet. Although I'm basically an academic and the first professor of African religions at Harvard many years ago and at Princeton, my vocation is working for peace in the world. I almost spend more than half of my time in doing peace work in East Ethiopia, East Africa. And thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this interesting and fascinating dialogue.
Our program explores the idea that all things have ethical standing, including humans, the non-human, and the more than human world. We're aware that having an ethical place for all things may be relatively recent in Western thought, but it has a long home in other traditions. So my first question is, what other cultures have a profound understanding of this complex ethical depth of things? And can you explain and tell a story that illustrates this? Dr. Case, could you take this one?
Sure, I'd love to. As I said in my introduction, I'm a Kanaka Maoli woman. I'm a Native Hawaiian woman, and I was raised in deep, intimate relationship to Aina. Aina is the Hawaiian word for land, but if you break that word apart, Aina actually means that which feeds. So it can be land, it can be sky, it can be ocean. It is anything in the world that nourishes, that feeds, that sustains us. And why this is so important is because I was raised deeply immersed in a Hawaiian way of living and being and relating to the world that taught me that everything around me, I am related to. And I think when we talk about Indigenous cultures and we talk about stories of relationships, so often our Indigenous ways of being and knowing and doing are dismissed as myth. The word myth has not done anything good for Indigenous peoples. It's dismissed as make-believe, as fantasy. But for Indigenous peoples like Kanaka Maoli and like other peoples in the Pacific, those kinds of relationships are a lived reality. So when I grew up, as I said, I grew up knowing of my mountain and my river as being my ancestors, as being entities that I'm related to. We have chants and proverbs and prayers and stories that talk about our genealogical relationship to everything in the universe. And these chants often start in Po, which is the primordial darkness from which everything else was born, and human beings were born long after everything else in the universe. So we are the youngest, we are the Poki'i of the rest of the world. So when I talk about my mountain, I'm talking about my ancestor. When I talk about my river, I'm talking about my ancestor. When I talk about the rains that were pouring down on my parents' house this morning, I'm talking about an entity that I am related to, and that very importantly is older than me. And so that sets a code of conduct and a code of behavior, a way of behaving for us as Kanaka Maoli, and that we have to know ourselves as being related to the rest of the world, and therefore have the duty to be responsible for the rest of the world and respectful to the rest of the world. I think Hawaii often exists in the Western imagination as a paradise, as a place that people go to escape their problems. And I mention this because when people think about Hawaii and think about Hawaiians, they don't often think about a place that has been deeply pained because of the intentional severing of these relationships, these genealogical relationships. Hawaii was colonized. Hawaii is under the military occupation of the United States. And bridging on the brief reference to peace, which really touched me earlier, a lot of my work in restoring relationships and in building on relationships is to find a world of peace, not only for Hawaii, but for the rest of the Pacific and the rest of the world. And I feel like central to that peace work is acknowledging these relationships to place, to universe, to all of the entities around us, and really caring for and nurturing them. To give you a brief story, I'll try to keep this very concise that can illustrate these connections. I'm speaking to you from my parents' house in Waimea, Hawaii, and outside my window is my mountain. And my mountain's name is Mauna Kea. Mauna Kea's longer name is Mauna Awa Kea, Mauna meaning mountain, Wakea being the name of one of our oldest ancestors. In English terms, he's often called the Sky Father. And through his relationship with Papahana Moku, with our Earth Mother, they created our islands, they created the space within which we experience ourselves as Hawaiians. So that mountain is a child of Wakea. We are also children of Wakea, and that mountain is our ancestor. For the past few decades, Mauna Kea has been at the center of controversy. Because of its elevation, astronomers see Mauna Kea and the Pico, or the summit of Mauna Kea, as the prime location for telescopes, to build telescopes. But when you see that mountain as your ancestor and as protecting all of that which feeds, or all of your sources of sustenance, building on the summit of that mountain is desecration. So as a Kanaka Maoli, when I see my mountain being desecrated, I feel it. That pain is embodied, it's emotional, I cry, I ache, because of that intimate relationship. And so I think that's just a brief story, and I can expand on that story later, to illustrate the felt, embodied, intimate, sometimes very painful relationship that we have with the rest of the world around us, from our mountains to our rivers to our rains. We exist in a very interconnected, entangled web of relationships. And as such, we have the responsibility to be part of that relationship by tending to it, nurturing it, and protecting it.
Dr. Isaac or Dr. Shi, did you want to follow up on that?
I heard what our sisters have said. I think there is an agreement on all of us. In the Hebrew Bible, it starts by saying, It was maybe, I don't know, there is no way of translating that word into other languages. It means nothing, out of nothing. And it's like out of nothing, nothing come. And then when the creator created, he say, "Yehi or, let there be light." Yehi or, and there was light. And this is really very fascinating because light is, even from a scientific point of view, one of the most central aspects of the universe. And light, and then he said, he spoke, and sound is another aspect of the important pillar of the universe. So, and he spoke, and he said, he or. This is the Hebraic approach, which can be expanded on philosophically. But let me say, however, in some ways, there's an overlap between the African worldview and the biblical worldview. There's a book written some years ago called African Religions and its Relationship to the Hebrew Bible. I actually reviewed that book in the sense that in many African religions, the name of the Almighty is like heavens, Wakayo, Wakayo. And one aspect of African religion is that everything in the universe has a standing, everything, metals, stones, water. And indeed, when they say the world was created, they're talking not only about human beings, but about the whole universe. The universe is one, connected. And human beings, as well as trees, forests, rivers, they're all in some ways connected in the universe. And therefore, we have to respect them. If you throw a glass and break it, you've done damage to something. That is, let's say everything has a standing, that glass has a standing, and what you've done is wrong. It is disrespectful. Everything has got purpose. Everything has got a standing.
May I add to the fascinating conversation thus far? I see so much similarity between your worldviews as well as the Buddhist worldview. And in particular, what Professor Isaac has been telling us about this interconnection and what Dr. Case has been so passionately sharing with us. And in fact, I wish that your mountain will be reconsecrated soon. And I pray very hard that that will happen for the benefit of all of us, to appreciate and understand the wonders that's beyond the tangible. In the Buddhist worldview, of course, we believe in the interconnectedness. There is also an ontological device that we use to explain this, and we call it the Buddha nature. So the Buddha nature to us is to say that all things, whether they are living or non-living, sentient and insentient, they have this original fundamental nature. And this nature is that Buddha nature. Sometimes it's labeled as emptiness. We characterize it as being impermanent and having no essence, non-self we call. And as a result, there is what we call non-substantive interconnectedness. So as you have so eloquently pointed out, that every object before me is connected with me and with everything else in the world. We describe that interconnection with a metaphor called the Indra's net. So the Indra's net, you can imagine, is like a huge fishing net, for example, and on the node of each fishing net is a jewel. And in that jewel is reflected all other jewels. And all other jewels also reflect this particular jewel. So if we consider all of us, whether we are humans, non-humans, whether we are sentient, non-sentient, we have a place on this net. And because we have a place on this net, we have standing. And we are all reflected of one another, whether through past, present, and future. So it's infinitum of time and ad infinitum in terms of space. And it's in this beautiful Indra's net that we have to be mindful of every action, every mode of speech, and every thought, because there will be repercussions through this net. So in summary, I would say that the kind of philosophical underpinning that we use to explain this could be something along the lines of, you think of all of us, sentient and insentient, we're all super glued together in this closed system called perhaps Earth, but also the entire universe. So a tiny change in the form of even a volition will have energy that reverberates through this super glue that we will inevitably affect one another. And therefore, most important in our practice is the practice of compassion. Thank you.
Thank you to everybody for those responses. If I just may, and one thing particularly stood out, and then I had a follow-up question. Dr. Case, I think this came out in your remarks most powerfully, the idea that humans are the infants of the universe, and in that sense have so much to learn from the wisdom of nature. And I think that idea, it serves as a real powerful counter to certain narratives of human exceptionalism. You think of the sort of humans on top, humans of the sort of pinnacle of creation, and not that that's necessarily incompatible with a view of humans as sort of the infants of the universe, but I wonder, and I just thought that was something that really resonated with me personally. So I was grateful for that. And one question I posed to the panelists as a follow-up comes from this emphasis on interconnectedness. The fact that we're interconnected can mean wonderful things for everybody involved in that web of interconnectedness, but it need not necessarily be so. Our interconnectedness means that we are perhaps necessarily posing certain harms to each other just by virtue of interacting. And so I just, maybe not so much of a question as an invitation to sort of reflect on that aspect of our interconnectedness. What sorts of qualities and virtues might be called for in light of that fact? Dr. Shi, I heard you talk about compassion, and I think that would probably be very relevant. So I'll sort of wrap up my comments here and turn it back over to the panelists if anyone has any thoughts on that.
So yes, Chris, I think it's so correct that interconnectedness is just the description of how we are doing. And with that, we have to now stand back and say that since we're all interconnected, what does it mean? And I think that compassion is what should arise. And in fact, it will inevitably arise when we allow this truth to arise in us, when we know that we are interconnected with all objects. So one of the training that we have in Buddhist monasticism is that we have our prayers around, we wish all things. So for example, when I eat or when I drink, we wish everything will also be nourished by whatever it will consume and be nourished by the positive energy that it will embrace for the day. So we wish that any goodness that we have, others will have. If we should be hurt in any ways, we wish that this hurt will enable us to become more aware of this action, and we will not repeat it on others. So we do not wish others the same. And the way we wish is, first, we wish for ourselves, and then for those we love, after which to some strangers or neutral parties, on to enemies, and on to all things, sentient and insentient. So this is the way we try to express interconnectedness in a more positive way.
Thank you.
I'd love to respond to that if possible and add, I loved that description of interconnectedness as a description of how we're doing, because I think it speaks to the state of our world and the state of our planet. And if we look at realities in the Pacific peoples, especially on many of our low-lying islands, are the most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, rising sea levels, rising temperatures. And as you were speaking, Chris, I started to think about that interconnectedness and the inability to be disconnected from the rest of the world, which can often have very destructive consequences. There's a beach in Hawaii on the island that I'm from called Kamilo. And if you look it up online, it's often called Plastic Beach, or one of the dirtiest beaches on the planet. And that's not because Hawaiians or people from Hawaii are just trashing the beach. It's because Kamilo means to churn and twist and twirl. And it was named that because of the twisting and churning currents of that area. So we are in close proximity to the North Pacific garbage patch. And because of that, the world's trash ends up in that garbage patch and ends up in the rotating North Pacific gyre, or system of rotating currents, and then ends up on places like Kamilo Beach. So the world's trash is on Kamilo. And when I first visited Kamilo and saw trash from all kinds of places with brand names in languages I didn't even recognize, I had to pause and think about that interconnectedness and think, if the world's trash is here, where is mine ending up? Because what we contribute to the world, especially when you look at plastic or trash, doesn't always go away. It just, doesn't disappear. It just goes away and ends up somewhere else. And that's when I really started to think about interconnection as being beautiful, but interconnection is also forcing us to face the realities and sometimes the destructive habits of our lives, so that we can realize the way that our lives in one place, my life here in Hawaii, can be impacting other places and other peoples in other parts of the world that I might not even know and may not think about every day. And that goes back to something I mentioned earlier about always seeing yourself in relation. And that's not just to the things and the peoples and the places and the entities in your physical space, but around the world. Yeah, thank you.
And let me add something that for me, what fascinates me is the magnitude of the universe. I was recently reading something which says, if the a black hole the size of an apple comes very close to the Earth, it is so heavy, millions and millions of kilograms more than the Earth itself. It could swallow the Earth. Well, we hope it won't. But this mystery of the universe is the first thing we have to understand, that all things are interconnected. That imagine the black hole, the size of an apple, that is millions of times heavier than our own little Earth. I think the study of great scientists is also helpful for us to understand how the whole universe is interconnected. Now, beyond that, we really are talking here about the ethical dimension of the human responsibility, meaning we each have responsibility. Love your brother as yourself, as your sister as yourself. Love the world, love the objects around you. In other words, have respect. Respect for our fellow human beings, respect for the place where we live, respect for whatever we have. That is another thing. The other thing is, when you look at light and sound, there are big mysteries. We talk to each other and we use sounds. We look at each other through our eyes. How we are all connected. Maybe there are other creatures that are able to look at us also, as we look at them. I myself always believe the world stands on three things, as some of the rabbis used to say. Mine is love, peace, and truth. Love, peace, and truth. That in fact, when we talk everything has a standing, it has standing only if we can connect to each other through love. We can talk more about it, but maybe I'll stop here.
That's terrific. And that's a great segue into the next question I wanted to pose. So we might think about it like this, is Dr. Isaac placing a lot of emphasis on this idea of respect. And one of the themes we explored in All Things Have Standing is the power of stories to attune us to the ethical standing of things and as a way of cultivating respect. Because we talk about respect, but we've also acknowledged that as humans, there's a strong tendency to not respect things, to not respect other people, to not respect natural objects. So obviously we can't take that as a given. So, one question is, how do we learn to best respect these things? And what role might something like storytelling have to do with this? And not just the stories that we tell ourselves, but also the stories that things themselves have to tell. This was a big theme in the All Things Have Standing program, was how is it that we can attune ourselves to the voices of things, to the stories they have to tell, when they don't necessarily speak our language, so to speak, when they don't speak in the traditional sense at all?
I can start. Thinking about the power of stories and storytelling and how we attune ourselves to the voices of things that may not speak in the same way that we do. I'd actually like to go back to something Dr. Isaac said, which was about love, and love being one of the foundational things that we stand upon. And in Hawaii, we have a concept, aloha aina. And I explained aina earlier as being that which feeds land, water, any source of sustenance, usually used to refer to land, but much broader than that. And aloha, arguably, is one of the most misused and misunderstood words in the Hawaiian vocabulary. It means hello, it means goodbye, it also means love. When put together, aloha aina means love of place, love of everything that feeds. And, I was briefly looking at some of the literature that you've provided to us and have given to other people, but I was really struck by that concept of tenderness, and tenderness not being something that's soft. And when I describe aloha aina, I often tell people that it is a fierce love. It's the love that hits you in the heart and that pulls at your gut, because it requires you to act upon the interconnectedness that you have the rest of the world. I'm going to put my insecurities on the side. I'm going to put my lack of courage on the side, and I'm going to do what I need to do. And that's aloha aina. It's a protective, fierce, ferocious kind of love.
Thank you, Dr. Case. That's terrific, and I'm glad you made the connection to the tenderness theme from the program, because at least for me, and I think for other people working on the program, sometimes we have a tough time thinking about what is this idea of fierce tenderness, especially with a lot of the cultural baggage with the idea of tenderness, as it being something soft. So your example just so powerfully concretized that for me. So thank you. Dr. Shear, Dr. Isaac, did you want to touch on this point about storytelling and the capacity to listen to things that from beyond the human?
I'll be happy to follow up.
Great.
That's okay.
Yes.
So there are a few things about what Dr. Case has said that resonates with me a lot. First is when she defined aloha. when I hear the definition of aloha, now I think of an equivalent term that we use when we greet one another in Buddhism, and it's called Aumi Tuofo, or the name of the Amitabha Buddha. And what it represents is infinity. So we usually join palms, and when we say Aumi Tuofo, we are saying that from all 10 directions, that's north, south, east, west, as well as northeast, southeast, northwest, southwest, top and bottom. So all 360 degrees from my heart to your heart, we would say Aumi Tuofo, which could mean hello, which could mean goodbye, but it is really embracing the love of the universe and sending that across us and intensifying the connections across peoples we meet and greet. So I find the aloha greeting so beautiful. I'd like to just say a little bit about storytelling, but from a Buddhist perspective. I'd like to say that as sentient beings, all of us have sensory organs that help us to perceive the world. So every signal that we receive through our eyes, our ears, our nose, our sensory organs, and through our touch, gets fabricated into our life's story. Then we use that story to make sense of the world and engage with life. So stories give us a plot that can help to make our lives meaningful. And the protagonist of this story, for most of us, is this quote-unquote I. And the story itself is not the problem. However, this concept of an I is, because we often think of this I as independent and self-sufficient, and we think of all ways to try to satisfy this ego. So for example, if I believe that I have become rich and famous and well-respected because of my university education and the rich and famous people that I know, then in my lectures that I deliver, I will tell that part of my life stories that will then go ahead to reinforce that belief, as well as I will pick out similar stories from others. And that story will grow deeper and deeper with me. So that was what happened to me before I encountered Buddhism. And for the past 20-some years, what Buddhism has helped me to do is to unpack that story to discover that I am not just an independent entity that I'm trying to cultivate. Instead, my life story is now enriched by the sunrise that I see in the morning. It's enriched by times when I pick up a dying earthworm from the road that I'm walking and sending it into the earth. It's enriched by a very intricate network of jewels on these Indra's net that I mentioned earlier. And every object then gets reflected into this fabric. So I find that stories can be dangerous if it reinforces a false sense of this quote-unquote I. But stories become so useful when they bring out the meaning of how we are connected with everything else, and then the reflection back to us, the moral implications to drive us in terms of our future actions for a better future. So that's my take on stories.
Before I say something about storytelling, let me summarize what I consider the 3 levels of the ethical standing of things. One level is human relationship, our fellow human beings, person to person, ethical, moral relationship. The 10 commandments were given on Mount Sinai to guide us as to how we humans should be related. In Greek philosophy, in other philosophies, we have ethical standards, ethical systems that try to teach us the principle of moral, ethical relationship. And I think when we talk about the ethical standing of things, we must first start with our fellow human beings. How do we relate to each other? How do we, in the world today, in which there are wars, fightings, killings, destruction, what is the ethical standing among human beings? That's a question. It takes a long time to answer. The second level of the ethical standing of things for me is our relationship to the world in which we live, our earth. Today, the earth is being polluted. The environment is being completely destroyed. We are now, the United Nations and other organizations are very concerned about what is going to happen when we look at the way we are completely destroying the world in which we live. So that issue of the ethical standing, we have a relationship to earth also. We have a moral responsibility, how we treat the trees, how we treat the rivers, how we treat the world itself. And instead of polluting the earth, burning things, destroying, using bombs, creating destructive bombs to destroy the world. So we have to respect first, learn to respect our fellow human beings, to the world in which we live, and try to make the world in which we live a beautiful, clean, holy place. And then the third is the universe itself. The universe in which we live is the most fascinating thing in the world. We speak about lights, millions of lights of years when we talk about some of the stars, the galaxies, when we talk about our own solar system. We are revolving against each other. The sun is shining on each planet, and then each planet is revolving around the sun. And then our galaxies are revolving. Everything is revolving around everything else. It's the most fascinating reality. We human beings have a little brain, and that little brain, it seems to really be able to look like through the mirror and appreciate this. Therefore, these three levels of our ethical interconnectedness is with our fellow human beings, with our own planet called the Earth, little Earth, part of, and then with the universe in which we are. Now, speaking of storytelling, I grew up reading all those stories, the stories about the Israelites in Egypt, stories of King David. This is the way of teaching us how we understand that there is an ethical interconnectedness. Those stories were very important for us to teach us the standard of the level of ethical interconnectedness of human beings.
I wanted to pick up on the aspect of storytelling because I realized that I kind of dropped that out of my previous response. But in Hawaii, we have a very rich tradition of hula. Hula is, again, often seen on movies and on screen as something that's very soft and graceful, but it is also fierce. It is also strong. It's also bombastic. Hula is storytelling. It's embodied storytelling. It's using my body, my voice, my expressions, my limbs, my legs, my feet to tell stories that may not be my own. Stories of the environment, stories of the earth, stories of interconnection. I started dancing hula and being trained in hula before I ever went to school. So it is my first education. And what hula has taught me in my life is that every single thing in our world is storied. Everything has a story. Every rock, every tree, every spider web, every snail, every insect. And when I go to different places, I now reside in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And when I first moved there, I realized that I couldn't connect to the place because I didn't know the stories. So I had to learn the stories so that I could intimately connect with that place and love it, so that I could grow and nurture a fierce aloha for that place. So I feel like my life is in constant search, or spent in constant search of stories. because of that early upbringing in hula. And it's the stories that then feed the aloha and move us to stand in protection. Thanks.
That's great, and it so powerfully illustrates this idea of things telling their own story in a different voice. So how does the mountain speak? It speaks through the dance, which is a non-verbal form of communication. And I think when I hear the word storytelling, my sort of knee-jerk reaction is to think about a written story as a vehicle of communicating, but dance is a form of story. It's an embodied form of story. Storytelling doesn't have to be limited to the novel, let's say, or something like that. How do we know the stories that we're telling? Can we know? Is that the right question to even be asking? That the stories we're telling do honor to the nature of the things that we're trying to represent?
Well, indeed, the stories we tell are precisely to focus on the principles of the moral life. We don't tell stories just to laugh at them. Some stories, yes, we tell, they make us laugh. But many stories are told in order to teach us how to relate to our fellow human beings, to the earth in which we live, and to the universe. So that's the way I look at it. Maybe a couple other things in terms of storytelling. There are sometimes stories told through festivals and festivities. Like in Ethiopia, they have two particular festivals. One is called the Festival of Fire, and the other is called the Festival of Water. In September, where all the people come together and bring branches of trees, and the whole night they put up and that's in a way also maybe a storytelling through the use of fire. And then in January, they have what they call the Festival of Water. It's a cleanliness that in order to, you've been committing a lot of sin during the year, you need to be washed. And water is a symbol of cleanliness. And so people come into the river and immerse themselves to chiefly cleanse themselves from the wrongdoing.
So that's really interesting, because I mean, with this idea of purification, we, as a form of ritual, as a form of storytelling, I think we arrive at an idea of storytelling as a form of healing. Storytelling as a means of healing our relationships to our fellow brothers and sisters. Storytelling as a way of trying to heal our relationship to the land that we inhabit, and healing as a way of, or storytelling as a way of healing our own relationship to ourselves.
I'll be happy to follow on from there. I think I appreciate very much Professor Isaac's emphasis on relationships, and therefore, Chris, when you speak about a healing relationship, and I think that begins with ourselves. And that's the reason why when I spoke about storytelling earlier, I spoke about us trying to appreciate how we are constructed, and we need to deconstruct ourselves in order to properly listen to the other. So for example, I would quote a 7th century called a Buddhist master. He practices Chan, or what we would more popularly today known as Japanese Zen. So it was called Chan before. So the 7th century Chan master said that before practicing Chan, we see mountain as mountain, we see water as water. While practicing Chan, we see mountain, not as mountain, and we see water, not as water. After practicing Chan, we see mountain is still mountain, we see water is still water. So the way I interpret this, and especially in the light of healing that you're bringing up, Chris, is that before our practice, we see an object as an independent object with its own characteristics. So it may be, let's say, a robot or a rock. We see it just as it is. We see its utility a lot of times and its ability to fulfill our needs. But as we practice and as we start to hold back on our views and undo our stories, deconstruct our stories, we start to see our interconnectedness and how we live in one another, how we are a part of one another, and how our stories actually reflect on one another. And as we do so, we start to have confusion. We start to have struggles. We start to ask ourselves very difficult questions. For example, like the plastics on the beach. How am I polluting other beaches? And how is it that what I'm doing is impacting even some other part of the universe in a black hole that I do not even see? So we go through that as part of our practice. And then when our perception and consciousness one day shift, I think that's when healing really takes place. And that's when we start to see things as truly a part of one another. And we see the suchness of things, which is what we call the Buddha nature in our language. And the mountain is still mountain. The water is still water. But our relationship is one of respect, of friendliness, of togetherness.
That's beautiful. I'd love to pick up on that. As others were speaking, I started to think about, from a Hawaiian worldview, this kind of intimate connection and storytelling as healing. And in Hawaii, the Hawaiian word for placenta is ieve. And ieve actually comes from the word eve, which is root, like the roots of trees. So when children are born, we take the placenta, we take the ieve, and we usually plant it under a tree. And we have a proverb that says, "E koloana no kieve I kieve." The roots are going to find roots. Metaphorically, family will find family. The placenta of the child is going to find the other eve, the roots of the tree that you've planted it under. And that the life of that child and the life of that tree are going to become so interconnected that when you see the tree blossoming, the child will be blossoming. If you see the tree struggling, something's wrong in the child's life and you need to remedy that, and you need to take care of that, and you need to fix that, and you need to attend to that. And I wanted to also pick up on your earlier question, Chris, about looking at stories and trying to figure out whether or not we're still centralizing ourselves, whether or not we're actually listening to, or whether or not we can listen to the stories that our non-human relatives or things in our universe are trying to tell us. Are we just interpreting them as we want to interpret them to suit our own agenda, or are we really listening? And to take us back to the mauna, or the mountain, there have been times where we have been corrected, where the mountain itself has sent strong winds or rough rains and has said, maybe that's not the way you're supposed to be going. Maybe that's not what you're supposed to be doing. There are so many examples of when construction crews have tried to get to the top of the mountain and we get a freak snowstorm in the middle of summer on the top of our mountain. And we listen and we say, our mountain is telling us that's not what she needs right now. She doesn't need that construction crew there. So I believe that the universe and that our non-human relatives teach us. They sometimes teach us harshly because we need to learn as well, and we need to learn to listen. We don't always get it right because we are infants in the longer genealogy of creation, but we can get there if we do try to become more attentive and really center aloha and center our responsibility to the rest of the world.
I'm really very impressed with the way both our Dr. Emelani and Dr. Jue are enthusiastically teaching us this evening. Let me add an idea to the concept of storytelling. Going back to my childhood, it was not just through storytelling we learned the ethical standards, but sometimes it's through what we call proverbs. Proverbs are equally important, like storytelling, because they pierce through the mind of a person in a couple of words, in a couple of sentences. And the other is music itself. Music plays a very important role in showing how we are interconnected. There is light, there is sound. Sound itself, even we're talking about the singing of when the wind is blowing, in some ways it is blowing and singing. It's almost like I know some winds sound like music to me, the humming of the trees, and it's amazing, really. Sometimes you sit at night and listen, look at the moonlight. By the way, the soft moonlight is one of the most inspiring things in my life. And then we'll sit there and chant. And as we chant, we also hear birds coming singing. And those birds are also talking to us. And then you hear some animals, even hyenas, whose noise I didn't like, or the lion, they all make big sounds. And all these sounds harmonize together. And so music brings harmony to the universe. And so much more can be said about the importance of proverbs and music along storytelling in teaching us the principle of everything has a standing, everything has a standing.
I think we really are very interconnected. I was just in the Daintree rainforest 2 weeks ago, and the Daintree rainforest claims to be the oldest rainforest in the world. And when I was there looking at these huge trees, but there were also very tiny trees, but they are over 1,000 years old. We don't have to look at things from just a face value. In fact, it's because they grow so slowly that they survive very well. And I've also learned about moss, that moss are so tiny, but yet they're the oldest plants in the world. So in a way, I think nature speaks to us if we remove our filters and are able to hear them out. So every day when I come to the Nantian Institute, that is across a footbridge from the Nantian Temple where I live, I see some magpies. And when I look at the magpies, they're such beautiful singing birds, right? They sing so beautifully. And I realized that magpie and me, one and the same. Then when I look at the lotus flowers and the dewdrops in the morning, dewdrops and me, one and the same. I think nature sings to us in their own way. It just takes us touching the earth, takes us hugging the trees, takes us just stealing our footsteps to hear their stories. And there's so much to teach. I'm very, very grateful to our ancestors, to our relatives, brothers and sisters in this big universe.
Dr. Shi, I'm glad you mentioned touch here. You've talked a bit about the senses and the way that we process the world through the senses, and touch is one of these senses that's really come up for discussion in All Things Have Standing. But there's a sense in which we talked about. Well, in the history of Western philosophy, sight is often what's privileged. Sight is often the sense most associated with knowledge. And there's a sense in which there's a worry that as much as sight reveals, it also has a tendency to conceal, to cover things up, because we see what we want to see. We see in accordance with the ideas that we already have about things. And touch is interesting because touch breaks us out of that cycle of sight, if we can call it that, because there's a sense in, especially when we touch something, there's a sort of mutual vulnerability between the toucher and what's touched. I mean, I think of sort of touching a hot stove as a good example of this. I mean, you're vulnerable to the heat given off by the stove, just as in a sense you're affecting the stove by touching it. I'm grateful for you referencing touch in these conversations, because it's certainly something that's been on my mind throughout some of this program. So this idea of festivity that Benso introduces, I think it's understood as a way of inhabiting time for Benso. It's a certain mode of temporality, if you will. And I think it's best contrasted with what she calls instrumental time. So this is instrumental time is more or less the way we occupy time in our everyday lives. So it's future oriented. It treats things in terms of their use value, in terms of their instrumental value. But during times of festivity, we break with that future-oriented, use-oriented way of being. Because in festivity, we're no longer working. It's a holiday, it's a celebration. And Benso tries to develop this idea that festivity, it's a way of inhabiting the everyday world in a sort of festive manner, a manner that doesn't instrumentalize things, but allows us to see things and listen to things in their own right, in their own standing. So I guess the question would be, is there anything akin to these sorts of festive practices, this sort of festive celebration of the infinite interconnectedness of things that you can think about from your own cultures and traditions that you could bring to bear on the discussion?
I mentioned hula earlier, and I was so glad that the discussion also with Dr. Isaac went and talked about music, because hula is dance, but it is also chanting, and it's about the movements and the vibrations of your body. And I think that hula is an example of a festive practice because it is about escaping the now, or not escaping, maybe escaping isn't the right word, but not just existing in the now, but existing in the past or existing in the future and telling the stories of different times. We have a saying in Hawaiian, "A'akahula waiho kahila hila makahale." When you learn hula, when you dance hula, leave all bashfulness at home, because it's not about you. You have to inhabit the story. You have to be the story. You have to actually get out of your present time to live the story as it needs to be told. So if I'm going to dance about the eruptions at our volcano, I need to be the volcano. And there's no room for me in that, and for my bashfulness or my anxiety or my embarrassment. Hula can be very ceremonial and very celebratory. It can be deep and very serious, and it can celebrate procreation. We have a whole class of hula that are about procreation, and they're fun and they're light and they're festive, but they allow us, these dances and these chants allow us to kind of get out of our everyday world to celebrate the wholeness of our worlds, past, present, future, and to kind of suspend time, but also live across time simultaneously. So I would say that that's one of our ways that we not only celebrate stories and tell stories and celebrate interconnectedness, but allow our bodies and our minds and our hearts to kind of transcend time, to be in the story, to tell the story, to encompass the story, to live the story.
Yeah, great. And let me just say thank you to Dr. Case, Dr. Sheehan, Dr. Isaac for being here this evening. This conversation has been fascinating and enlightening, and I'm very grateful. So before we part, I just wanted to turn the floor over to all of you once more and see if you wanted to leave us with a parting wish for the world, perhaps.
Ladies first.
First of all, I would just like to say thank you for this opportunity, and Chris for your beautiful facilitation. And of course to Professor Isaac and Dr. Shi. I've learned so much. And what I love about sitting in spaces like this is that although we come from different places and different backgrounds, you can definitely see all of the overlaps, all of the interconnections, all of the resonances. I was on mute for most of it, but I was humming and sighing in agreement and saying things like beautiful and yes the entire time, because what you were saying definitely touched me and resonated with me. To end, my wish for the world is aloha. In all of its complexity, in all of its nuanced layers, it is love, which has a foundation in relationship and in knowing relationship to the world. And I truly believe that with that kind of aloha, we can save this world and create a better space for future generations. Mahalo nui a oko pakahi. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I'd like to echo Dr. Case's gratitude to Chris for this facilitation, and of course to Professor Isaac, to Dr. Case. I just can't tell you how much I have learned and appreciated your sharing today. I feel like now I've got friends in all continents. I feel so connected. I want to also echo my thanks to the technology. We mustn't forget the Zoom technology, all this email technology that put us all together. And also many, many conditions behind the scenes, the many hands in the Carnegie Council, Vital Steel Production, for putting that great audio recordings together, to many of the actors, just so many hands, so many, many, many different hands that enable us to sit where we are today. It just makes me think that, sure, we are going through a period of struggle. We are going through a period of awakening as a result. I think what the pandemic has done is has highlighted to all of us that we have to look for solutions. And there are some who go towards economics, science, and technology. And there are others who go back into a reservoir of goodness that's intrinsic in us and also in all things. This particular recording has helped me to think out of the box, think out of just, and decenter my dialogues away from me, away from humanity alone, into all living things and into all things as past, present, and future. And I hope that we will all be able to progress on our path in whatever direction it takes us, but perhaps to truly listen, to truly listen deeply to ourselves, and to just find that tender heart that's in us, that fierce tenderness, that compassion that's in us, and use that to touch everything around us. And that energy, I'm sure, will reverberate through the universe. All the best, auspiciousness to all.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Jue, and thank you so much, Dr. Melanie. I found new sisters tonight, and you'll be my new sisters. I had two sisters when I grew up. You are my two new sisters. For me, the center of everything is peace and love. What I wish for ourselves and for the rest of the world are those two things. In the Proverbs, Isaiah, it says, nation they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall no longer fight. They shall never raise their arms. When we live in peace, we also live in peace with the trees, with the stones. We live in peace with the universe, with the earth in which we live. I used to love the moon, really love it. Well, I'll come to love, but peace, the sun, the warmth of the sun makes me, at peace. And the light of the moon makes me at peace. And therefore, for me, what I wish for all of us and for the whole universe, number one is peace, 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 shalom, shalom, shalom. And number two, love among all of us. Love is really said to be one of the strongest pillars of the universe. Therefore, my greatest wish for a world in which I want all things have standing is love and peace. Love and peace. Shalom in Hebrew, ahava, and in other languages also salam in Arabic, and naga in Oromo, tuta in many, many other languages. So let us all pray so that this whole universe will be imbued with peace. All the stars will love each other. All the planets will love each other. And we, human beings, will love each other. And then we'll live in peace.
So in closing, let me just thank our panelists again, Dr. Case, Dr. Shi, and Dr. Isaac. Thank you all for being here this evening.